Many people are familiar with New York bright lights, but few people know what lurks behind the shadows. Hello, I'm Sil Curiati, and in this new episode of New York Story, I'll take you out on a spooky tour around New York City to celebrate one of my favorite holidays, Halloween. It is no secret that there are many haunted spots in the city and surrounding areas. From the Dakota, where John Lennon was murdered, and he used to see a ghostly lady crying in the building, to Washington Square Park, which is said to be one of the most ghost-infested parks in the United States. It was built over the bodies of 20,000 people who were criminals, or mentally ill, or victims of the past and other epidemics. There are endless stories which will undoubtedly make you shiver. This is the White Horse Tavern, the second oldest bar in New York City, founded in 1880. The Horse used to serve working men coming from the piers, but around 1950 it became popular among writers and artists. Jack Kerouac and James Baldwin were regulars, but it was poet Dylan Thomas who made it even more famous. He had his own seat here, which is right here next to me. Can you see him? Yep. And one day he decided to see what would happen if he drank 18 shots of whiskey. Well, you may guess what happened. His ghost is said to be seen here. I felt my purse, though I can guarantee no one is sitting next to me because I'm scared. And empty glasses show up every now and then. I'm sorry. Some people say he died at the bar, while others say he died at our next stop. Maybe this is where poet Dylan Thomas died of alcohol poisoning in 1953. But this hotel has more infamous stories to share. Hotel Chelsea was built between 1883 and 1884, and it has been called home by many musicians, writers, and artists in general. It closed in 2011 for a major renovation and only opened in 2022. Some celebrities who lived here include Bob Dylan, Arthur C. Clarke, Leonard Cohen, and Patti Smith. But in its past, Hotel Chelsea housed survivors from the 1912 sinking of the Titanic. One of these survivors housed here was named Mary. She lost her husband in the Titanic sinking. Mary became very depressed and was never able to adapt to life after the Titanic. Mary hung herself in her room, and to this day, she's a well-known ghost on the 5th floor. Mary often checks herself on the mirror, so she's referred to as the vain ghost. However, the most famous celebrity ghosts here in this building are punk rock artists Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. She was found with a stab wound in her abdomen in October 12, 1978, apparently the work of Vicious. He was charged with murder, but was never arrested. He died a few months later from an overdose at a friend's house. But the aura of Vicious and Spungen's ghosts remain in these hallways. This next stop, the Blood Manor, hosts the haunted attraction here in Tribeca, but there is a story behind this building. You might know that Tribeca is the abbreviation for the triangle below Canal Street. However, some of you might be surprised to learn that the 3 points that mark this triangle also mark some of the most gruesome and scary events that ever happened in the city. Well, some say they were the most scary. I'll let you decide. The first one happened right here, where photographer Matthew Brady used to take portraits of a lot of soldiers. He also took some famous pictures. One of them is very well known by all of you, Abraham Lincoln, the picture you see on the $5 bill. This photographer decided to take pictures of some Civil War soldiers. And every time he would come back to his studio at 359 Broadway to develop these pictures, the photos of the faces of the soldiers were melting. And some strange smoke was kind of flying in the air above their heads. Apparitions. On top of that, since 1859, when he left the studio, some people say that if you walk on the third floor and pass by the door where his studio used to be, you still hear some snapping of photographs and some screaming of the man he was supposedly taking pictures of. The second event happened almost a century later, when a fire that erupted at 623 Broadway devastated the entire area. Firefighters of 12 jurisdictions tried to help, and one of them in particular, Wilson Palmer, is said to have saved dozens of women and children. After that, he would have strange night strolls in the area that occupies the second point in the Tribeca Triangle. He said that he was listening to men screaming, and the screams would come from the textile factory, which takes place in the same studio that the photographer would take pictures of Civil War soldiers. However, the building was completely empty. It was just a textile factory that would work during the day, not at night. But he was sure that some men were dying here in this building. This story ended up with Mr. Palmer hanging himself, clenched within his hands. He had a $5 bill with Abraham Lincoln's eyes painted in black ink, and in the back, in calligraphy, the words, "No photos were written," in blood. Then, in the third story, the third spooky point of this triangle is the Brooklyn mob boss, Crazy Joe Gallo, and his dramatic death in Umberto's Clam Bar in 1972. A guy named Luparelli was said to be driving around the area, and later he went to the FBI saying that he was fearing for his life. He claims that scary screams would wake him up at night and follow him through the day, driving him crazy. Turns out that Luparelli and his family were tenants of the very same building where the photo shoots were happening, where the textile factory took place a century later, and then his family lived here too. But most weirdly is that Luparelli was now, at this very time when the screams were following him, living on the third point of the Tribeca Triangle. If you're ever in New York, don't miss the Blood Manor attraction, and check out this building and the other 2 points of the Tribeca Triangle to see if any spooky events happen to you as well. Now let's take a look at the most haunted house there is, the House of Death. Since its construction in 1850, 22 people have died in this building. The house's most famous tenant was Mark Twain, who lived here for a little over a year in 1900. One evening, he saw a piece of wood flying on the house. He thought it was a rat, so he shot it. The piece of wood was on the floor with some drops of blood, but no rats were found. Apparently, the last crime that happened in the house was in 1987. But let's not talk about it. Let's talk about my experience in this house, because I've been to this house to a meeting where I talked on a stage. What was frightening about that day is that we were hearing a woman screaming throughout the morning and a cat crying like crazy. We did not know then that this house was haunted. We just thought it was weird. But as I was very impressed with the disturbance, I decided to look the house up. And that's when I found out that the name of the house is the House of Death. Did you hear this? This is tricky because I don't want to scare the customers out of the store. But the fact is, inside this store here in Soho, there is a well. And this well was the setting of a murder that happened in 1800. And this murder was the first one to go on trial in the United States. Levi Weeks, a young carpenter,
killed his girlfriend Elma Sands in December 22nd, 1799. Some of her possessions were found 2 days later in the newly created Manhattan Well here in Soho. Her body was only recovered on January 2nd from the same well. Before leaving her boarding house on the 22nd, Elma Sands told her cousin that she and Weeks would get married that night. When her body was found, Levi Weeks' brother, who was very well connected, got 3 of the most important lawyers in New York City to handle the case. Needless to say, even after witnesses have seen Elma leaving with Weeks that day, and a neighbor had seen Weeks measuring the well the Sunday before the murder, Weeks was acquitted after only 5 minutes of jury deliberation. I'll go inside the store to show you the well, but let's pretend we are ghosts. Nobody can see us there.